what I want to do is simply put together some thoughts about, first of all, what we might have through having a religious background to our culture. Secondly, about what a culture really is, and then what is the consequence of losing that background. I start with a famous picture. I'm afraid it's cut from the edges are cut off, but you will probably all know it because it's in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. It's Simone Martini's Annunciation, finished by Ricomemi, in which the Virgin is portrayed in the most wonderful and moving posture, with her her book in her hand, and the surprise and retreat on her face. Now, what does this picture tell us? It has a lot to say, obviously, and it says this to us in our secular world in a slightly muted tone of voice. It spoke vividly to the populace of 14th century Florence, but it's slightly more, as I say, more muted for us. But nevertheless, it tells us that we're in contact with another world, and that world visits us with messages that are important for you and me, as much as people who are more directly involved in the faith. It tells us also that God is interested in us and wishes to come among us. And that's an extraordinary idea, which of course is distinctive of Christianity, or at least distinctive among the Abrahamic faiths. But even more distinctive, more interesting, is that God asks our consent for this. He doesn't impose himself on us. The Virgin is presented with this possibility, and she says yes. The picture also tells us that female modesty has a theological significance, that this is not simply a fact of biological life, but it's a way of being prepared for just this kind of thing, a way of being prepared for a higher form of relationship to the world and to others. And of course, embodied in that is the distinctively medieval idea of the sacredness of virginity. Virginity has a sacramental quality, and this painting radiates that, of course, and is one reason why it has had such huge influence. Also, there are little footnotes around the way. For example, the book, going back to this, notice that the expressive nature of her hand around the book, that she was in that book, and she is protecting that book now. Her soul was in it as she read. The book itself is a kind of door to the transcendental, and that says something about the general significance of books in our culture, which derives from the original thought, of course, that it's in a book that the truth of human life is contained. There is also a sense in this painting of beauty as an expression of spiritual purity. The beauty of the Virgin, of her form and her face and her gesture, is not something to be understood purely in physical terms. It's something which embodies a spiritual idea and embodies the idea of her purity, a purity which is beyond that of being merely virgin, but a moral idea which is revealed in the flesh. At the same time, her face conveys everything through its expression, and this expression is an index of her freedom. She is free to choose, and that is what the angel is eliciting from her with his greeting, when he says, "Hail Mary, full of grace." So we see from this painting that we are singled out for our vocation, and the truth towards which we aim in our lives is one of distinction, not uniformity. She's been singled out, and her fate is a distinctive one. And that idea that we each are distinguished by our vocation, aiming for something which perfects us, is one that, again, is embodied in Christian culture. Now, reflecting on that kind of example, we have a vivid sense of the permeability of human life to religion. The religious spirit, the doctrines, the thoughts, the sense of what we are and how we stand in relation to God permeates that painting because it permeates the life of which that painting is a product. And there is no way of detaching Simone Martini's religion from the way he understands the human form, the human face, human relations, sexuality, virginity, the role of books and reading, of privacy, and so on. All those features of human life which actually shape us as social beings are already saturated with the religious ideas. And at every level, I think we can say that, and such examples show it, that culture is aligned with the religious spirit. But both our attempts to elevate the human condition, the culture that we have and which is exemplified by such paintings, is not separable from the religion, but it does something which the religion doesn't itself exactly do. It presents a vision of human life through aesthetic ideas rather than through doctrine. But nevertheless, both religion and high culture of that form attempt to elevate us so that we strive to be something better than we are. But which of them comes first? And the obvious answer is the religion comes first. The culture that we have, Western culture, is downstream from the revelation. I mean, obviously there can be a culture of doubt, but that's probably the one in which we now live, but it is only there, this culture is only there where there has also been certainty. Larkin, in his famous poem, Church-Going, asked the question, what remains when disbelief has gone? Meaning, for a while we hang on disbelieving the things that we were told once to believe. But when we can't even disbelieve them anymore, what is there? What is there, as it were, which anchors our sense of the distinctiveness and the ideality of human life? So the great question is, could we have the culture without the revelation? And in the modern period, and I think by that I mean the early 20th century really, artists had that great question, and many of them worked their way back from either nihilism or atheism or some kind of sense of the emptiness of the secular world around them, worked their way back towards the original Christian revelation and reclaimed it, or claimed it as their own, as it were, as a kind of archaeological discovery. T.S. Eliot is the most famous example of this, working backwards from the wasteland that he describes in the poem of that name to the Christian and nationalist vision expressed in 4 quartets. And of course that was one effect of the war. And I think all of us of my generation, and I'm ancient but compared with most people in this room, but people of my generation were very impressed by T.S. Eliot for this reason. I mean, he seemed to be have actually rediscovered the foundations that we ourselves were searching for and handed them on to us. He'd scraped away all the weeds that had grown over them and said, look, here, you can build again. And some of us thought we could do it. But there's a great question whether we did do it, or any of us, or whether it is really doable anymore. Well, that question points towards another, namely, what is culture? I'm obviously going to have to go quickly through a very difficult question here, a huge question. But just to summarise, I think we'll only understand what is at issue and what is at issue also in the future of humanities departments in our universities if we recognise that there is a radical distinction between common or everyday culture and high culture. Common culture consists of all the habits, the social institutions and so on, through which ordinary people relate to each other and acquire a common way of being and a common way of understanding the human condition. whereas a high culture consists of reflection on all that. Reflection through art, through the study of history, through the reflection on human institutions, and so on. And a religion embraces both of those, obviously you wouldn't be able to understand our Western culture if you didn't know anything about the religion from which it grew. And one reason, perhaps, why it is so difficult to teach people now in universities exactly what is significant in the culture that we've inherited is that they don't know anything about the religion which is necessary to understand if you're to understand the culture. So anyway, there is a culture means these two different things. When the religion is taken away, of course, they tend rapidly to drift apart. As you can see in music today, what I know as music, and what I suspect most people in this room know as music, has very little to do with what is picked up from their earphones by most of the younger generation. And it's very difficult to talk even to younger people about the music that they characteristically listen to, or rather overhear. And you know, to pass judgment upon it is regarded as a deep offence. And so there is a huge gap that has opened between the high culture that we study in universities and in conversations like this one, and the common culture that is abundant all around. So why should we study this high culture? No, as I said, high culture is, in my view, a sphere of reflection. We reflect on the meaning of human life. An ordinary culture doesn't reflect, it just is. It expresses that life without necessarily even making judgment on it. So a high culture, in this sense, as a sphere of reflection, can be taught, and it must be taught if it's to be passed on, because it involves intellectual effort, it involves making comparisons, passing judgment, and recuperating from an artistic tradition the sum of knowledge contained in it. And that's a great question that I haven't time to talk about now, but what kind of knowledge is it? What is the knowledge that's contained in the poetry and music that we've inherited? You know, what kind of knowledge is contained in Bach's Brandenburg Concerto, for instance? And I would like to make the claim that there is a sphere of knowledge what to feel, which is absolutely integral to the understanding of poetry, music and art, and the various meanings contained in the objects that we make, and that this is really why we transmit a high culture, because this knowledge what to feel is also something which is hard to acquire. I'll give us, well, I'll come on to a couple of examples in a minute. I would like to connect this idea that there is a knowledge of what to feel with an old theme in philosophy, which is really a theme of German philosophy rather than English philosophy, a theme of the relation between the subject and the object. We find in objects the perspective that, as it were, confronts us from them. The principal object in which we find this is the human body, of course. We find in relating to another person as an entity in physical space, we find that he is there looking out at us, addressing us, responding to us, and we automatically try to reach through the gestures, the expressions, the words, to find the I, the ego, that looks, that addresses us in that way. And it's as though in each of us there is this subjective perspective within, which is all important to each of us, and is also important to the other who tries to reach it through his understanding of us. And this leads to all kinds of paradoxes, of course. Can we actually reach through? Can we actually grasp the subject behind the object? Is the other not forever hidden from us? And what is it to grasp it? What would it be if we could achieve it? Well, without going into those deep metaphysical questions, which obviously occupy philosophers, we can at least recognise that this way that we have of looking for the subject in the object is something that can be subjected to education. That's what the Geisteswissenschaften, as the Germans call them, had as their goal, to amplify the way in which we understand the subjectivity of the other, to understand the way others feel, understand the meaning of their gestures, understanding how we idealize ourselves in our products, how we represent to each other an image of human life which we would like to achieve, even if we don't ourselves exemplify it. And that, of course, is what I was doing in describing the painting by Simone Martini. I was giving a little piece of Geisteswissenschaft about this particular painting. And we call the ways in which we study this humanities, because they are concerned with what distinguishes us, distinguishes the human realm, the human world, from the ordinary physical world around us. The physical world, as it was studied by all the great gentlemen and in this room, plus Miriam Rothschild on the wall at the back, that world was not one defined by subjectivity, not defined as a human world at all. It was the natural world, which has to be approached using scientific categories. And of course, it was the great advance of Darwin that he found the scientific categories through which we can explain the evolution of physical organisms. Thereafter, the study of nature, plants and so on, was brought into the system of ordinary causality. But those of us who've defended the Geisteswissenschaften don't think that that method is sufficient to understand the human world. That we live in another world, a world that we ourselves create through our interreaction, a world in which the subjectivity of each other is the fundamental item of study. And this is something which has no role in the physical world. There's no mystery in this, because this is how we live. So there should be no mystery in studying this aspect of the human condition through making comparisons, building up a sense of how we human beings represent ourselves through our products and so on. And the imagination is a fundamental part of this. We human beings don't merely exist as in the way that other things do, according to the laws, the biological laws governing us. We also imagine how we might exist, and we imagine ourselves existing under other laws, and try to draw a picture of what it would be like if that were the case. And through that picture we understand something about our own emotions and capacities that we wouldn't understand through any kind of scientific inquiry. So the imagination has a very important part to play in this kind of education. So culture, then, if we look at it this way, high culture, I mean, is a form of knowledge. Knowledge what to feel, knowing how to use objects in order to relate to subjects, and knowing, in general, how to imprint the distinctive character of the human life on our surroundings so that we can recognize each other and participate in a shared environment. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples from architecture to show what I mean. Here is a corner from Pietro da Cortona's a little church of Santa Maria della Pace in Rome, where you see concentrated a fantastic amount of knowledge of how lines join together, how lines of force are answered by the weight that they sustain and brought to some kind of rest, how light falls on buildings, how shadows create a sense of relaxation and tension, and so on. This is not easy to do it's a lifetime study to know how the forms of classical architecture can be combined in that way, and it involves understanding a sense of how part meets part, how one thing is an answer to another, how one thing raises a question that still needs an answer, and so on. It's a form of composition, and much of human achievement is like that, learning how to compose things out of parts so that the whole is a serene and a complex unity. And I contrast it with a characteristic piece of the modern architecture. This is by Tom Main of Morphosis, whose latest project is to build a 1,000-metre skyscraper in the middle of the Swiss Alps. There you see something which is not composed of parts. It's one continuous blob designed at a computer by somebody who doesn't know how light falls on things or how one part of a building relates to and demands its satisfaction in another, and so on. You can compare with the little piece of classical vernacular next to it. You see how it is an alien presence in the city street, not to speak of its complete its disaster as a functional object. You see, even to clean the windows, you have to stop the street with a boom lift, and it will never change its use. So in 10 years' time, it has to come down anyway. So that kind of culture that I've defended, high culture as I've defended it, is something that can be taught. You've just seen an example of somebody who really knew it and had learned it and done what he had to do, and somebody who's acting out of ignorance. And you see how it matters, because whereas Pietro da Cortona added to the fabric of Rome in a beloved little corner, Tom Main has destroyed a street in New York which will never be the same again. So the culture of this kind is still, many people say that all it is either an ideological expression of economic interests, that's the Marxist view, or it's just a collection of what Dawkins calls memes. So I just wanted to say something about his debunking theory of culture. You know, he thinks of a culture in all its forms, both common culture and high culture, as being composed of these things called memes, which are self-replicating cultural units that use the energies of human brains to multiply. So you can explain culture as you explain everything else under the theory of evolution, as in terms of the random replication and the adaptation to the surrounding conditions, which enable some to survive and others to disappear. Now, there are such things. We have a paradigm in the catchy tune, you know, the La Donna Immobile, for instance, which was whistled by everybody after its first performance all over the city within an hour. It's not Verdi's greatest achievement, but nevertheless it clearly is a kind of virus. There are examples like that which do seem to have something of the character that the theory of genetics attributes to the gene. Memes, on Dawkins' view, are propagated by imitation. So in this view, culture is a kind of parasite. Science, however, is not a matter of culture. That's an extension of the brain's cognitive role. Culture is the merely parasitic occupation of the brain by things which have no cognitive significance at all. Well, this is an appealing metaphor, but what does it amount to? It discounts altogether the fact that we judge ideas, assess them, reject them, hold them to the bar of validity and truth and virtue. You know, even if these ideas are not scientific ideas, we discuss them among ourselves and try to obtain a consensus about them. In giving you those two architectural examples, I wasn't supposing that you would be neutral as to which of them you prefer, or as to why. On the contrary, I was showing you something about which we can argue and ought to argue, and it's pretty certain that everybody in this room and everybody indeed outside the Royal Institute of British Architects would agree on which of those to prefer. So, besides, this debunking theory of culture makes no sense of interpretation and is unfalsifiable because it gives no biological correlate to the meme as Dawkins understands it. So I want to put in place of it a bunking theory of culture, which is really my response to people like Dawkins. What their scientism, their attempt to incorporate all forms of reasoning into the scientific paradigm is, I believe, really a kind of magic, using science to conjure, to reassemble human life in order to exert control over it. But genuine scientific thinking begins from independently defined problems and sets out to solve them. But culture isn't like that. It doesn't begin from problems and set out to solve them. It is a sphere of artifacts that are linked to our aspirations and ideals. It depends on judgment, and that is what the humanities should teach. And I think that they always did in my day, and there's a great question now as to whether they still do today. And this, I think many of the doubts that people have about the role of culture in a university is that people don't know whether it is still possible to teach these things. I think it is, but many people say that that is simply a subjective judgment of mine for which I can give no authority. And I think we see all around us the rise of fake culture, fake art, and fake scholarship. Here's an example. Next door, there's a whole exhibition of this, only last summer, of Alan Jones's appalling bits of sexualized kitsch. And another kind of kitsch. This is preemptive kitsch. Somebody who knows that his audience are so horrified by kitsch that he makes something that's so deliberately kitsch that it can't possibly be kitsch. It's a fake of a fake, and it's up to you, the intellectual, to see the great, profound point of it. Here it is standing in front of a piece of architecture built by someone who had studied the art. So what's missing? This is the art of our times. It is a bit cluttering the courtyard outside at this moment. And one wants to ask oneself, what is missing from all this? Now, faking is a very important thing that we do, and it has a reason. People fake things because they want the benefit of something without the cost. You know, by faking it, you get the benefit, but you don't have to pay what it costs. And this is true certainly of fake art. The artist wants the benefits conferred on artists without paying for them. Some of these benefits are financial, and they can be huge, of course, in the case of art that can be owned. But they are also social, because we've been brought up on this view of high culture that people like T.S. Eliot gave to us, that high culture in general and art in particular contains the key to the meaning of things, the key to the meaning of human life. But when the art is a mere fake, of course, the result is meaningless. So what would restore the meaning? And I think this is where the question of faith returns to us. There is a discipline of humility, which is absent, of course, from those two examples I've just given you. Is consecration, or it is nothing. That was really in the back of T.S. Eliot's mind when he defended high culture as an avenue back to the religious revelation that we had lost. His view was that in the difficult situation that we are in the modern world, where we've lost so much of that inherited idea of the sacred, we still must try to consecrate our world. And art is one of the means that remains to us to do this. And if we don't do this, art is pointless. It is a nothingness. And I rather agree with that. And I think that shows us why faith matters. But of course you can believe that faith matters without succeeding in obtaining it. And that is the situation of many well-meaning people today, including this one. So the things that matter to us stand apart from the world. That is something that I think is implicit in all that I've said about high culture, that we're talking about the ability of human beings to stand apart from the ordinary and to represent the ideal as part of what they are aiming at and part of what they are. And so all of us, even if we lack the fundamental features of faith, the belief in the transcendental creating deity and so on, we still make a distinction between the sacred and the profane. We still have an idea of things that are sacred and which we ourselves attempt to consecrate to others and to life in general. We all have this feeling about love, about family life, about friendships, about the various ceremonial affirmations of what we are when we join together in order to recognise that it is worthwhile being here and that we should celebrate it and also prepare ourselves to make sacrifices on behalf of it. But these things, which I think everybody naturally feels, become fragile if we think that it is we alone who provide their meaning. So that we do stand in need of a sense of the transcendental in our everyday life. That is to say that there is a source for this meaning other than we who receive it. That somehow it comes into our world in another way. And that, of course, is what Simone Martini represents in the figure of the angel in his great Annunciation. So if we think like that and think that culture has a role to play here, and high culture I mean, then we ought to think that art must belong in general to the practice of consecrating things. It must be a way in which we attempt to as it were, put a frame around these things and raise them to an altar which would justify our worship of them. But that's not what we see today. We see it rather art as a kind of desecration of human life rather than a consecration of it. And these two ideas, I think, are very much in play in all the things that we feel about the art and literature and music that has been, and especially the architecture that's being produced in the world around us. But the fact that we think in these terms is, in my view, a proof that there is such a thing as the sacred character of our own products and the things that we encounter. One proof that something has a sacred character is that we can desecrate it. And our world is full of desecration, the face being a primary target. We deface the person. And this is one of the functions of pornography and also of the Tarantino-style violence in the cinema. But it's a kind of defacing of the person. The person comes before us as a mere object, without that thing from which he looks at us and addresses us. But we deface, of course, the environment too, and that just goes without saying, and people are still alert to that, interestingly enough. Here's an example of art that desecrates the Chapman brothers, who take great delight in these repulsive, possibly paedophilic images of congealed bodies with penises for noses and all the rest. I contrast it with this. I come back now to the theme in which I began. Here is another Virgin, this time a Virgin and Child from a later painter, Venetian school, Jacopo Bellini, in which we see an image of something that is sacred and is made sacred also by the way in which the painter presents it. And obviously, studying such a thing, you're studying something completely different from that Chapman Brothers sculpture, if you can call it that, thing made out of poured plastic. Because you're not just studying an image, you're studying what you see through that image and the whole world revealed in it. And to modern people, of course, it's not an object of worship. You don't worship paintings, nor should you. And nor, for most people, is it an instrument of worship. Let's say it's not something through which we confront the Virgin Mary and worship her. Because this painting has huge significance even for people who don't accept that aspect of the Christian faith. It expresses the sacred without being sacred. And how do we know that? Well, there is obviously a sacred story attached to it, but we don't necessarily believe that story. We can still sense in that painting an expression of the sanctity of, not just of the Virgin Mary, but of what she represents, of the relation between mother and child, of the coming into this world of the divine, and so on. And the artist wants us to look beyond what we see, and also to see the beyond in the immediately present. And that is surely one of the functions of high art of this kind, that it doesn't simply say that there are truths about the transcendental. It says that those truths are about this here, now, about the immanent. You find this in the world, and the blue of that cloak is in this world, but somehow not of it. It's one of the greatest pieces of blue in the whole of the human environment. But we don't know exactly why that is so, but it is. That blueness, as it were, brings into the present something which isn't itself of the present. And the tenderness of the mother is at the very edge of what a mother can reach. It points beyond the one-sided boundary that surrounds all our lives, the boundary of our own possibilities, to something which is more godlike, and which we cannot reach except in thought. We can't pass through that boundary, but it's, as it were, it's as though we're standing at it when we look at that painting. And I think that's it. Yeah.